Welcome to Cybercast, decoding today's cyber issues. I'm your host, Kate Macri. This special episode looks back on our CyberScape National Security virtual event. The event featured notable cyber leaders across public and private sectors, including the nation's new National Cyber Director, Chris Inglis. The state of federal cybersecurity is a national security concern for the Biden administration. Malicious emails are up 600% due to COVID-19, and experts estimate there is a ransomware attack every 11 seconds in 2021, according to a data security and analytics firm, Varonis. In 2021 alone, the largest ransomware payout was $400 million, according to Business Insider. Federal agencies are especially vulnerable, according to the U.S. Government Accountability Office Director of IT and Cybersecurity, Jennifer Franks, in a recent Cybercast interview with government CIO Media and Research. Cyber attacks are also hitting bigger, more critical targets, as we saw with the December 2020 SolarWinds software supply chain breach, and then the May 2021 Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. These attacks affected civilian federal agencies and critical infrastructure sectors, leading President Joe Biden to sign the executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. At our national security event, federal cyber leaders discussed the cyber executive order, their cyber priorities this year, and how to protect critical infrastructure from ransomware. Starting off the event, National Cyber Director Chris Inglis said he wants to focus on the integration of cyber defense and cyber offense during his tenure.
For the moment, we're somewhere between tactical and strategic in our consideration of ransomware, which I think is, while it's the scourge of the moment and it's widespread and we need to do something about it, I think it actually reflects some deeper concerns that we all have to have about the nature of cyberspace at the moment. I don't think that we have sufficient resilience in the technology or the people or the doctrine, meaning the roles and responsibilities. We're not joined up in a way that we force adversaries to beat all of us to beat one of us. And we're not aligning actions to consequences in the way that we should. There should be rewards for good behavior and there should be penalties for bad behavior. When you add all of those up, that creates a situation where aggressors, whether they're criminals or nation states, and in the ransomware world, sometimes they're both, turns out that they can take advantage of us because they find the seams or the weaknesses in any of those dimensions, and they race across that space in between. So we need to take all of those on. There are sometimes calls that say that we should simply double down on imposing consequences. That's an important piece of the whole. But if we don't take care of the defense, if we don't take care of the proactive defensible architecture, then I think any amount of trying to shoot our way out of this will wind up being insufficient. So what I am concerned about, and I think I join a number of others who are similarly concerned about, is how do we make use of all of those pieces? How do we bring them together such that they complement one another with a focus on integration and collaboration as opposed to the strengthening of any one of its parts?
Inglis wants to achieve what he calls cyber synthesis between the public and private sectors. He wants to guide this synthesis in a complementary role. The private sector will be key because federal cybersecurity relies so much on private industry innovation.
Well, they're essential, I think. I think we all know that 85-90%, that's a figure of merit, but it's probably close. 85-90% of what happens in cyberspace is innovated, developed, deployed, operated by the private sector. To include critical functions. And those critical functions are things that the government has an interest and a responsibility to ensure that on behalf of its citizens are done and done well. But if it's the private sector that's delivering them, in some cases, the private sector will be the supported kind of organization and the government will be the supporting organization, making sure that we're delivering to the private sector that which we must to ensure their success in operating and delivering those critical services. Having said that, there's responsibility on both sides of that relationship. Private sector is going to have to imbue the digital infrastructure with sufficient resilience and robustness that it's a harder target. It'll never be made perfectly secure. That's not something that's possible in this very dynamic world. And so we're going to have to then actually defend, right, that architecture. It won't defend itself, which is going to be in large part fronted by the private sector, but to some degree supported, aided, and abetted by the government. And at the end of the day, we need to figure out how to use all the instruments of power that we have. Private sector has many, but the government has several more. And we have to use those in a way that they integrate and kind of co-join such that we have a collaboration back to the original premise that I offered, which is how do we make it such that an adversary in this space needs to beat all of us to beat one of us? That's not about simply connecting the dots of what we know. Sometimes we can't each or one kind of form a full thought ourselves with the information we have. We have to actually collaborate at the lowest possible level such that the insights that one party has can be aligned and reconciled with the insights that another party has, and that together they form a dot, they form an insight that then makes a difference. Because adversaries, when crowdsourcing us, we might see part of it on one side of a barrier, part of it on another side of a barrier. It's only when we take those walls down, respecting privacy, respecting kind of proprietary interest, it's only when we take those walls down that we see it for what it is, a threat that holds us at risk in common.
Key to improving federal cybersecurity is implementing the Zero Trust mandate in Biden's Cyber Executive Order. Maury Haber, Chief Information Security Officer at Beyond Trust, said the federal security community needs more education around Zero Trust.
So when we consider Zero Trust architectures, we first have to make sure people are educated very well on Zero Trust. We use the NIST 800-207 document as a guideline, and it is an easy read if you haven't looked at it, to basically form the architectural guidelines that everyone should be looking at. The reason being is that when you consider what we're dealing with today in terms of work from home and the dissolving perimeter and the transition to more mobile workforces, et cetera, we need a methodology to say, look, I can actually architect solutions that can be used anywhere by anyone, but have the security that I need to assure that it is the right person with the right asset using those systems. And that can be everything from a remote system to a remote application to someone using it from their mobile devices. And this is more than just remote access. This is everything in terms of concepts of like least privilege, because you want to make sure that when someone is using those applications, they can't get those administrative rights or excessive privileges that are known to be attack vectors that potentially could harm our government resources. So we apply a lot of the best practices in terms of vulnerability management, security, least privilege, and we architected it in a way to do so. We have to remember, Zero Trust is not a product. It's not something that you buy off the shelf. It is a methodology and architecture that is well documented to use existing solutions or new solutions in a way that we're not dependent on firewalls and network controls to provide the security. Once we do that, we can do the continuous monitoring, we can assure access, and my mission as a vendor is to help get that product out there. But as a CISO for my own company, make sure I'm using it too, because just like many private sector and government agencies, my employees are still working from home in large capacity, and I have to find a way for them to be productive and do their work well.
Brian Conrad, acting director of FedRAMP, said he's working with CISA to support Zero Trust implementation at federal agencies. But federal agencies should keep in mind that cybersecurity, especially cloud security, is a team sport.
We approach cloud security as a team sport. It's collaborative. Everybody has their part to play. And so, we look at that, understanding also that the commercial entities that we deal with, cloud service providers and 3PAOs have a lot of talent in their organizations, and it's a multifaceted issue. So, what a 3PAO sees and what a cloud service provider sees will enhance our ability to have a holistic view of issues and problems. It's a shared security model. Okay. There are things that when an agency uses comes and grabs a FedRAMP package, there are certain things that are known, right, and certain things that are addressed in that package. But it's also reinforcing the requirement that the agencies or the user let's say, has certain responsibilities with that too, because if that, and a big one is configurations, as John mentioned, right? We need to make sure that the customer responsibilities are clear, so when those cloud services are implemented within an organization, that they are secured properly.
John Sims, Senior Technical Advisor in the Office of the CTO at CISA, stressed basic cyber hygiene. He said the federal cyber community needs to understand how data and networks communicate in order to deploy Zero Trust effectively.
The one thing that strikes me is that, especially when we're talking about cloud and some of the newer technologies that we use in our environments, we have the opportunity to address some very basic configurations in terms of how we turn things on and standardize not only the protections, but the visibility. And when we look at the opportunities, especially with some of the larger cloud security providers, being able to, as Brian said, look at how we can use it, these features as guardrails is very important. Right now, I would say we have a limited set of guardrails. We need to maximize that in terms of how we, look at some of the configurations in the M365 AWS, as well as in the Google platforms, because I think that there's a learning curve associated with using these environments, and I know that over the last couple of years we've made significant strides, but a lot of work that we've done at the program level at CISA, in particular with the Trusted Internet Connections program, we've partnered with Microsoft in particular to look at how we could employ Zero Trust in an Azure environment, utilizing the TIC 3.0 reference architecture and security capabilities. So we need to do more of that. We definitely need to partner with some of the agencies that are really leading the curve in how they're using cloud. And I think that the more effectively we can do that, the more quickly we can short circuit this problem and solve some serious problems.
Of course, part of the reasoning for deploying Zero Trust is to help protect against the deluge of ransomware attacks. Matt Swenson, Chief of the Cybercrime Unit at Homeland Security Investigations, offered a bleak assessment of the state of ransomware from a law enforcement perspective.
The ransomware actors and their methodologies and the way that they function in an organized capacity is getting much more sophisticated. So, we think of ransomware, the vast majority of ransomware groups, they essentially function like organized criminal networks. Some of the variant groups, we see, as many as 80 or more actors, all working in conjunction. They've become very specialized in their skill set. So whether you have, the malware developers, the money mules, the people who gain network access, the people who function as help desk operators to negotiate payment, and all that type of stuff. They are very, very specialized, and they each have an individualized skill set, and they're all working together. So we've seen a huge boom, a number of factors. The ease of use of cryptocurrency is one, ransomware as a service, and their affiliate networks. So they're willing to bring people in to their ransomware groups and give them a cut of the payment per the way that they spread the word in these affiliate networks. So that's why we're seeing more attacks, more sophisticated attacks, more successful attacks, is that, they've really got their methodology down pat now. What differentiates the ransomware crews now from what you would see a decade ago is their ability to move laterally. If you look at the most of the major ransomware attacks that have occurred, basic cyber hygiene could have prevented the vast majority of them. So killing their ability to move laterally, all the stuff that Lance and Mike have been talking about, heavy network segmentation, network security monitoring, zero trust models, multi-factor authentication, all those types of things. And then I think coming at it from the perspective of if not when, hey, we're going to get hit. So then what do we do about it? Do we have, off-network backups? Have we practiced the restoration of data? I've seen networks where, they have, off-storage backups and they've never once practiced. And then they start the process and it doesn't go according to plan by any stretch of the imagination. And understanding that business continuity model of, hey, if we do have to restore from backup, what does an outage look like? Does it take us 2 weeks, 3 weeks in order to restore? And I think that ransomware actors realize that. They understand how painful 2 or 3 weeks of downtime can be, and they adjust the ransom accordingly, knowing that, hey, we're more likely just to pay it and be done with it than to go through a rigorous 2-3 week of downtime, which can cost the organization, a painful, absorbent amount of money. So all the stuff that both Mike and Lance are talking about, I think you start from the basic cyber hygiene, work your way up. And as you start to prevent just those basic things and get, more and more secure, I think you do end up preventing the vast majority of these types of attacks.
There's one small upside to major cyber incidents like SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline. At NASA, Associate CIO for Cybersecurity and Privacy Mike Witt said these incidents are driving systemic change.
So we've put a lot of protective capabilities in place, especially around our email, because that is probably the most specific threat vector that's being attacked these days with ransomware. We've went very aggressive on what email we allow to come into our network, but we've also done the vice versa. We're also aggressive on what email we actually allow out of our network from that standpoint. We've also basically done a lot of education with our users, because again, if something slips in, it really comes down to the users to recognize, not to click on something from that perspective or whatever. But again, we've got technology that actually sandboxes, I'll call it, all the user clicks and everything like that. But we are running very active, I'll call it red teaming against our network at all the time. That includes, I'll throw our users into that red teaming. And we are doing phishing, we're doing vishing, we're doing whaling. We're basically throwing everything at our users, text messages, the whole thing, to get their attention around really not clicking on things or whatever. Again, I would say, it's bad, right? But really, probably the biggest thing that helped us from an education standpoint is when things with like Colonial Pipeline start, those unfortunate incidents happen. That makes it real for our users. I'll call it in the real world, right? It's not just I'm working for a government agency and I've got to do annual, cybersecurity training once a year, et cetera, or whatever, or they, we maybe participate in this crazy phishing exercises or whatever. So when things happen in the real world and they end up on, live television, or they're impacted, I think as Matthew said, at the gas pump, et cetera, trying to find gas to get to work and stuff, right? This actually helps drive and reinforce what we're trying to do. And that's actually paid off for us. The SolarWinds was a perfect example. We were impacted with SolarWinds here at NASA. But what really came about of it, because again, that incident was so heavily advertised within the media around that and the results of it or whatever, I'm now got, I'll call it constituents here on our mission sides or whatever, that's coming to me going, hey, your job's tough. We get it now. How can we help you help us? And, that's a change in conversation that's happened over the last 5 years since I've been here. And so that's really what's kind of helped on us, is it's gotten real for our users.
At DoD, the Defense Digital Service is working to improve cyber policy so as to enhance cyber resiliency. Lance Cleghorn, a digital services expert with DDS, discussed some of the ways DDS is helping protect DoD's critical infrastructure.
We believe that improving the overall cyber resiliency of these devices and products is probably where we need to spend a lot of effort. Specifically, working with vendors to assess and harden their devices prior to release would be a huge win. If you think about like the initial vector for Kaseya being like sort of a 0-day CVE within their products, like it's an interesting concept to think that we could combat that kind of initial vector and kill chain this much earlier in the process. Really like getting at like what is our recommendation? Like how do we get to doing that? Our Hack the Pentagon initiative over at DDS is where we focused on bringing crowdsourced and boutique penetration testing. So recently we focused a lot in the ICS and OT parts of DoD networks. We've conducted a handful of these engagements, and I think we've seen some really exciting results. One of the things we're in the process of right now is sort of like shaping DoD's future as it comes to like IT and OCS devices. And these sort of assessments give us the window into like what works good and what doesn't work so great, and sort of helps us pivot towards that direction. But it's not to say like we've been immune within DoD to sort of ransomware, but I think really the big benefit we get is that there's just like a lot of diversity or like heterogeneous nature to DoD networks. Like Navy doesn't look the same as Air Force, doesn't look the same as Army, even though we all sort of follow the same general guidelines. So really when we are impacted by these kind of events, they tend to be smaller scale or more isolated. But really focusing in on sort of like the benefits that our models and sort of tried and true protections already give us has been the focus that we've reiterated for ransomware. Like if you think about like limiting user permission so that the ransomware can't actually encrypt network storage, or backing up network storage and not allowing access to the backups to anything other than service accounts, right? So really, I think that's been our focus, is that we've seen a lot of the ransomware has been like drive-by downloads and sort of like not extremely targeted when it comes to DoD. So that's really been our saving grace.
Another growing cyber concern is the security of IoT devices. Vincent Sredipan, chief of the Cyber Quality Service Management Office at CISA, said IoT devices can be a national security risk.
The applications that we do have, right, for us today are quite massive, and they'll be even more so going forward. I will say though that the concerns, right? So the fact that even if the fallback is onto if the fallback is to a mobile device or other networks, you have to think about where with this IoT device, how is it maintained? How is it connected? I'll say you have plenty of IoT devices. What happens if you think, oh, I do cyber hygiene, I can figure out how to patch my refrigerator, right? That's awesome. But what happens if that manufacturer no longer exists? Then what do you do? Right? There's quite a lot of aspects in which you have to think about the state, right? You can follow technical guidance and other aspects, but think about, well, do I segment my network differently? There are aspects of national security that IoT really makes a difference in our world because it has physical impacts, right? And I do think that, just like it can benefit if cyber, or malicious activities do occur, it could also have that negative effect.
Katarina Magus, program manager for IoT cybersecurity at NIST, said it's important to create national standards for IoT security.
The cybersecurity challenge isn't really just here within the U.S. We could try to improve the state of IoT and improve the state of IoT devices in the U.S. But if we don't really approach this on a global scale, we're not going to be able to solve the problem. And by doing that in an international standard space, it really encourages others and other nations to kind of adopt and meet this international standard. So, we've taken our work and we've provided it as contributions, and we are actively engaged in a lot of these international standards.
Our national security event only grazed the tip of the cyber iceberg. As national security concerns around federal IT multiply, check out our website at governmentciomedia.com for the latest news and insight. Subscribe to Cybercast for deep dives into today's cyber issues. If there's a cyber story or trend you'd love to hear more about, drop me a line at kate.macri@gcio.com. I'm your host, Kate Macri. Thank you for listening.
Cybercast is a production of Government CIO Media and Research. For more podcasts, head to governmentcio.com/podcasts. If you're interested in sponsoring a podcast, contact us at sponsor@governmentcio.com.